My wife Tiffany called me at 1:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday and told me to keep my mouth shut, and I said, got it. Because I have been keeping my mouth shut for 27 years and I am very, very good at it. Tonight, you can join my brother's fiance's family for dinner, but keep your mouth shut. Why? Her dad's a judge, Judge Gregory. He is very respected. Don't ruin Justin's big break with your glorified tech support job. Just be invisible. I smiled. I'm an expert at invisible. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. My father mopped floors that thousands of people walked across every day, and not one of them knew his name. My mother served lunch to children who said thank you to the tray, but never to the woman holding it. I grew up in Chicago, watching my parents be invisible. Not ignored and visible. People look through you like a window to see the view on the other side. I learned early that the world is divided into two categories. The people who are seen and the people who provide the surface that the seen people stand on. My parents were the surface. They were the floor, the cafeteria tray, and the people standing on them never looked down. When I was 15, I watched my father buff a gymnasium floor at 10 o'clock on a Friday night while the basketball team's parents sat in the bleachers and didn't notice him. That was the night I decided I would never be poor. But I also decided to stay invisible on purpose. Most people get money and immediately make sure everyone knows it. I wanted to know who people really were when they thought no one important was watching. I wanted to know if the world would treat me the same way it treated my father. I didn't go to college. I went to work. I started in data cabling, pulling wires through crawl spaces. I was good at it because I was my father's son, a man who understood that every system needs someone who pays attention to the foundation. By 25, I bought my first server farm. By 30, I had 12. I was buying the infrastructure that the modern world stands on: data centers, fiber networks, the silent bones of the internet. Today, I am the sole owner of Tidewater Capital. My portfolio is worth $950 million. My annual net income is $60 million. I drive a late model domestic truck, top of the line engineering, but intentionally ordered in a flat, unremarkable gray that blends into any suburban driveway. To Tiffany, it was a symbol of my stagnation. To me, it was a $60,000 fortress of anonymity. I'm worth nearly $1 billion, and for 18 years, my wife Tiffany has introduced me as a tech support guy with a downward inflection that makes my career sound like a stain she can't wash off. I see now that Tiffany is caught in a trap of her own making. She normalizes this casual cruelty because she's haunted by the fear of being common. Her shame isn't actually about my job or my clothes. It's a psychological defense mechanism. By demeaning me, she creates a distance between herself and the working class she so desperately fears. She has spent 18 years performing sophistication, not realizing that the man she's hiding is the one who owns the very stage she's performing on. To maintain the illusion in a city as expensive as Chicago, I led Tiffany to believe our home was an inheritance from my parents, fully paid off, and that my firm covered our property taxes as a seniority benefit. This allowed her to blow her own small income on the designer labels she craved, while I silently underwrote the staggering cost of our actual existence. I pay myself $68,000 a year just to maintain the experiment. I made sure our family's health insurance and retirement plans were managed through an independent executive consultant group. I told Tiffany it was a perk of my long tenure at the firm. She never checked the premiums. She was only interested in the fact that she never had to see a medical bill. To see who she is without the influence of the number. The knowing isn't good, but it's clinical. It's useful. Tiffany had spent weeks boasting that Justin's connection to a senior partner at his firm had secured us a guest table at the Union League Club. She had no idea that my family name had been etched into the founding donor plaque in the West Wing for over a decade. To her, we were lucky guests. To the staff, I was a quiet legacy. The valet at the Union League Club looked at my domestic truck the way a curator might look at a piece of graffiti in a museum, with a mixture of polite horror and deep confusion. I handed him the keys and walked into the lobby where the air smelled of floor wax, old money, and the kind of quiet that only $400 dinners can buy. Tiffany was waiting by the mahogany staircase, her eyes immediately scanning me for flaws. She straightened my blazer with a sharp tug that felt more like a correction than a gesture of affection. She reminded me, for the 10th time, that Justin's parents were footing the entire bill as an investment in his future. She warned me not to order the expensive scotch, fearing I'd look like I was taking advantage of their generosity. Remember, she hissed, just nod and eat. This is Justin's night. If Judge Gregory likes him, Justin is a shoo-in for that private equity firm. Don't mention your little server projects. I followed her into the dining room. The table was round, but the hierarchy was linear. Tiffany had engineered the seating so that Justin was directly across from Judge Gregory, placed in the line of sight where every polished smile and practiced laugh could be measured. I was placed at the far end, tucked between the judge's wife and a drafty window. Tiffany introduced me to the table with her usual efficiency. This is my husband, Russell. He's in tech support. She said it with that flat, dead inflection she uses for things she finds embarrassing, like a broken appliance or a stain on the rug. Justin was already mid-performance. He was leaning in, discussing interest rates and fiscal policy with a desperate intensity, trying to prove he belonged in a room he couldn't afford to be in. He looked at me once and offered a nod that was the conversational equivalent of a pat on the head. He treated me with the kind of polished indifference people reserve for the help. He talked over me, around me, and through me. I sat there, sipping my water, and watch the data accumulate. People often ask why I don't just speak up, why I let them treat me like background noise. What they don't understand is that this silence is a survival mechanism I've perfected over decades. It is the invisible chain of the survivor. Growing up, I learned that if you're invisible, you're safe. If no one sees you, no one can target you. But as I built my empire, that survival tactic evolved into a strategic vantage point. I wasn't being bullied. I was conducting a structural audit of their character. I was the silent stakeholder in their version of reality, watching them build their importance on a floor they didn't realize I provided. The main course arrived. $400 for a piece of Wagyu that was designed to make you feel like a person of consequence. Justin was laughing at one of the judge's stories, a sound that was a little too loud and a little too eager. Tiffany caught my eye and gave me a sharp nod, a silent command to stay in the shadows. I cut into my steak and waited. I knew the judge hadn't looked at me yet. He was busy navigating Justin's aggressive networking. But I also knew that Judge Gregory was a man who spent his life looking for the truth beneath the performance. And I knew that in approximately 10 minutes, the performance was going to end. The dessert menus were distributed like final evidence, and the table settled into that comfortable, smug lull that follows an expensive meal. Justin was practically vibrating with self-importance, convinced he had successfully auditioned for his new life. Tiffany glanced at me, and for the first time in our marriage, her expression was almost appreciative. She was satisfied because I had been a perfect piece of furniture, quiet, functional, and completely ignored. Then Judge Gregory stood up. He didn't just rise to give a toast. He commanded the air in the room. He picked up his wine glass and began to walk around the table, a habit I knew well from our private meetings. It's how he fills a courtroom. It's how he measures the weight of the people in it. He passed Justin, who offered a sycophantic grin. He passed Tiffany, who offered a practiced social climbing nod. And then he reached my end of the table. He stopped. The record skipped. The social smile, the polite host mask, the diplomatic indulgence he'd shown Justin all night, it didn't just fade, it was incinerated. He was looking at me with the expression of a man who just walked into a gas station and found the governor pumping his own fuel. The table went quiet. It wasn't a gradual silence, it was a sudden structural collapse of sound. Not a dessert spoon clinked. Not a glass moved. "Hello," he said. His voice had shifted from the casual tone of a dinner guest to the lethal precision of a man delivering a verdict. "I am genuinely surprised to see you here, Russell." I looked at him. I saw the question forming on his face before he asked it, the deep, genuine confusion of a man who knew my true scale and couldn't reconcile it with how I was being treated by my own family. "Do they know who you really are?" he asked. The question sat in the center of the table like a live grenade. Tiffany's face went through a terrifying sequence. Confusion, then alarm, then a raw, cold terror. She looked at me, then at the judge, her brain unable to process the data. Gregory, I said. I didn't use his title. I didn't use sir. I spoke to him as an equal, a peer. The table registered that single word like a physical blow. I don't think tonight is the appropriate time. Appropriate? Russell, as the chairman of the city's Medical Research Foundation, I have spent more time in my private study with you discussing your $32 million endowment for the new oncology wing than I have on the bench this month. It is a travesty to sit here and watch your own family treat a man of your stature like background noise. $32 million. The number hit the table like a brick through a plate glass window. Justin's face went the color of the white linen cloth. Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger inhabiting her husband's skin. The hierarchy of the table hadn't just shifted, it had been deleted. The most invisible man at the dinner was suddenly the only person anyone could see. Justin's face didn't just lose color, it seemed to physically deflate. He sat there, his mouth half open, looking like a man who had just realized he'd been laughing at a joke that was actually about his own execution. Tiffany was worse. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were the color of bone, her eyes darting between me and Judge Gregory as if looking for a punchline that wasn't coming. The judge didn't let them breathe. He turned his gaze toward Justin, his expression sharpening into the same look he used to dismantle a lying witness. You spent a great deal of time tonight, Justin, telling me about your ambitions at Pinnacle Equity Partners. You spoke about your vision for their private equity arm. I assume you haven't been following the corporate filings lately? Justin stuttered, his voice 3 octaves higher than it had been 10 minutes ago. I've been focused on my current desk, Your Honor. But Justin only knew the name on the masthead R.L. Thorne, a professional pseudonym I've used for every major deal to keep my private life separate. He had spent years studying the moves of Thorne, never imagining that the man he dismissed as a tech support drone was the same person whose signature controlled his entire career path. I've spent months trying to find a backdoor to their recruitment team just to get an interview. Pinnacle Equity was acquired 4 weeks ago, the judge said, his voice flat and lethal. The parent company that signed the check is Tidewater Capital, Russell's firm. He doesn't just own the building we're sitting in, Justin. He owns the firm you've spent the last 3 years trying to impress. The silence that followed was heavy, clinical, and absolute. I watched them struggle to process the data, and I realized I was watching the structural collapse of their entire worldview. This was the illusion of power in an empty wallet. Tiffany and Justin had built their identities on the performance of success, on the desperate need to be seen as people of consequence while treating those they deemed beneath them as invisible foundations. Their status was a costume they'd rented with arrogance, but now the lease was up. They were finding out that their power was an empty shell. When the money was revealed to be in my hands, they had no internal value left to stand on. Russell, Tiffany whispered. It was the first time she'd used my name without a note of condescension in 18 years. How? Why would you let me think? I didn't let you think anything, Tiffany, I said. I kept my voice clinical, the way I talked to a contractor about a faulty circuit. You accepted the surface because it confirmed your own bias. For nearly 2 decades, every time I tried to share a thought on a major market shift or an infrastructure deal, you'd cut me off to remind me to fix the Wi-Fi or take out the trash. You didn't want a partner who could challenge your world. You wanted a placeholder who wouldn't embarrass your climb to the top. Justin tried to pull himself together, leaning forward with a desperate, sickly smile. Russell, man, we're family. I was just, you know how it is. Socializing, I didn't mean anything by it. That's the problem, Justin, I replied. I leaned back, looking at him the same way I look at a server rack that's reached its end of life. You didn't mean anything. You've known me for 20 years, and you've never once asked me a question that required a real answer. That's not malice, it's indifference. And in my companies, indifference is an expensive liability. The recommendation you wanted, it's no longer the judge's decision, it's mine. And I think we both know what the answer is. Justin went back to the color of the tablecloth. Judge Gregory picked up his glass, offered me a silent, respectful nod, and sat down. The performance was over. The only thing left was the fallout. Tiffany didn't just leave the table, she fled it. The sound of her chair scraping against the high gloss floor was sharp and final, a scream made of wood and stone. She walked through the dining room and into the lobby, her heels clicking a frantic, irregular rhythm that echoed against the vaulted ceiling of the club. I waited for a beat, letting the silence at the table settle like ash. And then I followed her. I found her in the hotel lobby, collapsed into a large wingback chair. She was clutching her phone so hard I thought the glass would shatter, her chest heaving as she tried to pull air into lungs that seemed to have forgotten how to function. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide and unfocused. When she saw me approaching, her expression shifted from shock to a jagged, desperate kind of panic. "Russell," she whispered, her voice a thin, shaky rasp. $950 million? How? For 18 years, you let me believe you were nothing. "I let you be yourself, Tiffany," I said. I didn't sit down. I stood over her, as calm and unmoving as the mahogany panels on the walls. I wanted to know who you were without the influence of the number. I wanted to know who Tiffany was when she thought she was married to a man making $68,000 a year. And tonight, I finally got the final data point. "It was a lie," she hissed, her panic turning into a sharp, defensive edge, the beginning of the gaslighting I had expected. "Our entire marriage was a lie. You betrayed me by hiding this. You didn't trust me with the truth. How could you do that to your own wife?" "No, Tiffany. I structured the truth," I said, my voice clinical. "I paid myself a modest salary through a series of private trusts. Every tax return you signed for 18 years was legally accurate. It reflected the exact income I chose to draw. You never questioned the complex legal disclosures or the confidential stamps on our filings because you were too busy being ashamed of the title tech support to ever look at the numbers." She flinched as if I'd struck her, her eyes filling with tears that felt more like a performance than a realization. "The money doesn't matter to me, Russell. I love you. We can fix this." "The money is the only thing that matters to you," I countered, cutting through the performance. "That's why you're hyperventilating in this chair. You're not upset that I kept a secret. You're upset that you spent 18 years demeaning a billionaire. You're grieving the social status you could have flaunted if you hadn't been so busy being ashamed of the man who was providing the floor you stood on. I didn't marry a test subject, Tiffany. I married a woman I loved. But when I hid the wealth, the experiment designed itself, and you failed it every single day for 18 years. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized the Invisible Man experiment was finally over. The knowing was exactly as bitter as I had feared. I turned toward the exit, leaving her in the shadow of the wingback chair. The structural collapse of our life was complete. And for the first time in 27 years, I didn't care about staying in the shadows. 3 months have passed since the night at the Union League Club. It is now January 2026, and the world looks very different in the light. Justin's career didn't just stall, it evaporated. I didn't have to lift a finger to destroy him. I simply chose indifference. Without the recommendation he thought he'd earned through sycophancy, and with the knowledge that he had insulted the man who signed his company's paychecks, his position became untenable. He is currently working a mid-level analyst job in a city where nobody knows his name, discovering for the first time what it feels like to actually earn a living. My marriage is in what I call the hard renovation. Tiffany and I are in counseling every Tuesday afternoon. She is angry not at the money, but at the fact that I turned our life into a laboratory. She calls it a betrayal. I call it a consequence. Our therapist calls it a failure of mutual vulnerability. They are all correct. The truth is, I've come to realize that I was as much a prisoner of my invisibility as Tiffany was a prisoner of her shame. My mother told me 20 years ago that the hiding would cost me, and she was right. By refusing to be seen, I never gave Tiffany the chance to be the woman who could honor the struggle of a janitor's son. I denied her the opportunity to carry our family name with the quiet pride it deserved, choosing instead to let her stumble in the dark of my own making. I only gave her the chance to be the woman who was ashamed of a property manager. I assumed the worst of her and built a system to confirm it. The system worked, but the cost was a marriage that might have been better if I had been brave enough to step into the light sooner. We are trying to build something new now, one Tuesday at a time. It is slow and painful. There are no blueprints for repairing a trust that was never fully established. But I have stopped performing. I drive my truck because I like it, not to hide. I wear my clothes because they fit, not to blend in. I am learning that the strongest buildings aren't the ones that never crack. They're the ones that crack and get repaired. To those of you listening who have ever felt like you are at the edge of your own life, I want to say this to you directly. If you have spent years providing the floor for someone else to stand on while they never bothered to look down, I hear you. I know the weight of that silence. I know the particular ache of being invisible on purpose because you're afraid that who you really are isn't enough. But you need to understand that being afraid of being seen is just another form of self-imprisonment. You don't need anyone's permission to be valuable. You don't need $1 billion or a prestigious title to have worth. Your worth was there when you were pulling wires in crawl spaces, and it was there when you were mopping floors. Sometimes the best revenge isn't the destruction of those who overlooked you. It's the total, radical refusal to keep playing by rules designed to keep you small. It's the courage to walk away from toxic bloodlines and find the person you were meant to be before the world told you to stay quiet. Real freedom doesn't come from the number in your bank account. It comes from the moment you decide that you are done being a supporting character in someone else's performance. I am 52 years old and I am finally living in the light. It's bright and it's uncomfortable, but for the first time in 27 years, it's real. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the floor for someone else's success, hit that subscribe button. The next story is already written. It just hasn't been told yet.